It all happened on a night like any other. I was home alone with my computer and I wanted to access the dark web. I had done it before with friends and I was always curious to go further. I wasn't trying to buy anything or do anything crazy. I was just curious, and the whole challenge made me feel like I was doing something important, even though I knew it was mostly boredom. When the last setting finally clicked and the browser opened a hidden page, I felt a quick rush. Not strong, but enough to keep me there. The first sites looked outdated and almost harmless. I scrolled through them without much interest because everything looked like bad forms or broken links. For a moment, I wondered why people made such a big deal out of all of this, because what I was seeing felt cheap and pointless. I clicked through a list of black market pages that didn't surprise me at all, since most seemed empty or full of junk I didn't care about. My curiosity started fading. I wanted something shocking, but not too shocking, something that felt like a secret without being dangerous. Before closing everything, I decided to try something stupid. I searched for the name of a guy from school and got nothing. Then I searched for a neighbor and again got nothing. I almost closed the browser. That's when the screen changed from boring junk to something that made me lean forward without even noticing. A long list of folders appeared, each with a strange title made of different letters and numbers. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The dates on the right side went back 10 years. The exact year we moved across the country without much explanation. Seeing that timing made my chest tighten, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, steady way that made me nervous. I clicked one folder and saw a list of video files. I clicked another folder and it was the same thing. Every folder was full of videos with the same kind of names, like someone followed a pattern. I sat there staring because it didn't make any sense that searching for my parents would lead to this. I started wondering if someone had used their names for something illegal or if someone had tried to follow them. Before opening a video, I hesitated. I didn't want to see something awful, but I needed to know if this involved them or just someone else with the same names. After a long moment of convincing myself I was overthinking, I clicked a random file. The video showed the outside of my old house. My parents stepped out of the car like any normal evening, except a young man walked behind them, very close, keeping his head down. Neither of my parents looked at him. The sight made my stomach twist. I clicked another video because I needed answers. And this time, the screen showed a basement. A young man was tied to a chair, shaking and gagging, struggling to breathe. I recognized the basement right away. It was ours. I kept staring at the screen because I expected the video to glitch or cut or reveal a prank, but it didn't. The boy cried through the gag, and his legs jumped with every breath. That was when fear started getting real. Not panic, but a feeling that I no longer understood who my parents were. I clicked the next video even though every part of me wanted to stop. I needed clarity, even if the answers scared me. Before the video loaded, I felt a tightness in my throat because I could tell something heavier was coming. I waited without moving, and when the next image appeared, I felt a cold rush spread down my arms. The camera pointed at my parents walking into the basement wearing pig masks. Their steps were slow and steady. And the boy jerked in the chair when he saw them approach. My father rolled a table of tools next to him while my mother adjusted the ropes with a calmness that didn't match the situation. The next video showed my father hitting the boy repeatedly with controlled movements like he had practiced this before. The boy's body shook each time, and the sound was so clear that I moved back from the laptop. The next file showed my mother holding a hammer. She pressed nails into the boy's arms and forced them in one at a time while he tried to scream through the gag, and his whole body twisted in pain. A wave of nausea hit me so hard that I had to cover my mouth. The next video showed the boy vomiting from the pain and choking because he couldn't spit anything out. His head was jerking forward, and tears ran down his face as he tried to breathe through blocked air. The next file showed my parents removing sections of skin from the boy's cheek. Their hands didn't shake. Their breathing was steady. They were focused. I scrolled through the files quickly, desperate to stop seeing more, but unable to stop looking. Every scroll revealed more videos, more dates, more proof that this wasn't edited. It had happened in that basement, in the house where I slept as a kid without knowing anything was going on below me. I opened another video and the screen stayed black for a moment. I stared at it, knowing something worse was about to begin, because silence in those recordings always meant a new step. When the video finally started, I heard a loud motor, heavy and fast, echoing through the basement. A chainsaw. The moment the sound hit, I snapped the laptop shut so fast I felt the impact through my fingers. My body pushed back against the wall because I didn't want to hear anything else. I didn't even want to breathe. I forced myself to open the laptop again because I needed to close everything. But when the page refreshed, something new appeared. A new folder with my name on it. I couldn't process it. I stared at my own name like it didn't belong to me. I didn't touch anything. I didn't blink. My hands were shaking so hard that the laptop screen blurred for a second. I didn't know if the folder had been created just now or if it had always been there and I hadn't noticed. But the idea that someone had added it while I was watching the videos made my chest hurt. Before I could react, I heard a car door outside. I froze completely because my parents weren't supposed to be home yet. Another car door closed and footsteps moved across the driveway. My heart beat so loud it felt like it was hitting the inside of my skull, and I backed away from the laptop as if distance would help. The footsteps reached the front door. Keys rattled. The lock turned. I looked around the room and realized I had nowhere to go. The windows were too high. The hallways were narrow. I was trapped with the memory of what I had just seen and the fear that they already knew I had found it. The door opened downstairs. Their voices were calm, talking about groceries or something normal, and that normal tone only made the situation worse. Their footsteps moved toward the stairs. I grabbed the laptop and shut the lid so hard the hinge cracked. Then I sat on the floor because my legs felt unsteady. I held the laptop against my chest like a shield, even though it couldn't protect me from anything. Their steps came up slowly. My door opened without knocking, and my mother stood there with a relaxed smile like she had no idea what was happening inside my mind. Nothing matched what I had seen in the videos. It felt like two versions of them existed at the same time. My mother stayed near the door and spoke with a cheerful voice. "We brought something special for you." And she smiled with a look I had never seen before. I wondered what was happening, if any of this was real, until... I never wanted to cook again after I left the restaurant. I spent years breaking my back in a filthy kitchen, feeding drunk couples and businessmen who didn't tip. I quit after my mom collapsed in the bathroom. The hospital bills were eating us alive, and I couldn't afford to make 50 burgers a day just to keep her breathing. So I said yes to the only job that paid in cash, fast and without questions. I answered a post on a locked forum. Private clients. No license required. Excellent pay. Culinary skills a must. The address they sent led me to an underground facility with commercial ovens, blood-stained tiles, and vacuum-sealed bags stacked in cold rooms. The man in the suit gave no name, only instructions. Cook what's in the bag, record the process, and leave before midnight. The first night, I earned $5,000. I knew the meat wasn't beef. I don't care how well you cut it or what sauce you drown it in. Some textures don't belong in a kitchen. The grain, the color, the soft bones, it was off. The client said it was exotic, and the words just hung there in the air like a warning I didn't have time to understand. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was cooking to keep mom alive, and that these people would pay someone else if I didn't take the job. I stopped asking questions. I started improving the plates. Then they asked me to film myself while cooking. They sent a rig, GoPros, microphones, tripods, even a lav mic. I don't know who they were filming for, but it wasn't just one client anymore. Someone was building something, collecting footage, building a collection. A month later, the payment doubled, and the bag came with no label, just a note. This one's still fresh. Handle with care. The bag was warm. That was the first thing I noticed. There was condensation on the plastic, and when I opened it, I saw veins, still full. The cuts weren't finished. The skin was peeled halfway. Someone had rushed the job. There was no smell of rot, no stiff tissue, no drying at the joints. It was a real human body, freshly cut, probably alive an hour before it got here. I don't know the name, but the wrist still had a bracelet from a nightclub. I turned off the lights in the kitchen and sat on the floor. I didn't vomit. I didn't cry. I just sat there trying to slow my breathing. That was the moment I realized they weren't just clients. This was an industry, a supply chain. I wasn't a cook anymore. I was part of a process, and someone was always watching. A camera blinked red from a corner I hadn't noticed. I cut the feed and left everything as it was. The next morning, someone had cleared the kitchen. There was a note taped to my door with a smiley face and 3 words. "You hesitated once." That same day, my sister called me crying. My mom had gone into a coma. The hospital had no idea how they could afford to keep her there. But her bills were paid in full by someone else. I took the next job without blinking. I told them to send whatever they needed. I said I'd do it clean, no more delays. They sent me a new address, and this time, they didn't send meat. They sent a photograph of a man in his 30s alive, healthy, and smiling. The note read, "Prep starts with the legs. Delivery on site. You handle the harvest." I waited outside the man's apartment for 2 hours, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what I expected. A kidnapping van, a handler, someone to do the dirty work. But no one came. It was just me and the silence, broken only by the ticking of the dashboard clock. My stomach felt like it was folding in on itself. I stepped out of the car and walked to the door. It was unlocked. Inside, it was quiet. The furniture was untouched. There were family photos on the shelf. I followed the hallway to the bedroom and saw him on the floor, wrists tied behind his back, duct tape across his mouth, face swollen like he'd already taken a few hits. He looked up and made eye contact. He wasn't crying. He was angry, furious. Then I noticed the cameras. 2 tripods, a drone sitting on the dresser charging. This wasn't his house. It was a set. The walls looked like drywall, too clean, no dust, no clutter. Someone had built this place for the job. The silence felt heavier than anything I had ever felt in my life. I picked up the scalpel they'd left beside him. My hands wouldn't stop sweating. I told him I was sorry. I stabbed him in the side, once, twice. Blood sprayed the carpet, warm and fast. He didn't die clean. He convulsed. I held him down until he stopped moving. Then I turned to the cameras and nodded. They'd gotten what they wanted. 3 days later, I received a flash drive. It contained an edited video of the entire event. Cuts, music, slow motion shots of the meat searing, sauce bubbling, plating close-ups. It looked like something out of a cooking show. The file name was Episode 13, Chef Reggie's Return. I was the brand now. I was the product. My face, my voice, my technique. They had been following me since job 1. They had dozens of episodes before mine. I watched one, just one. I turned it off halfway through and burnt the drive. That night, I got a package at my door. Inside was a USB and a butcher's apron embroidered with my initials. There was also a note. If you try to quit, the next dish will be your sister. I cooked again, over and over. They sent people in boxes, in vans, tied up, broken, already half dead. Each job got darker. Some clients wanted live prep. Others wanted recordings of pain reactions, heat reactions, eye movement during boiling. I didn't sleep. I didn't speak. I worked. Then I got a box with nothing inside. No meat, no instructions,
Just a photograph of me taken from outside my bedroom window, time-stamped 3 hours earlier. The caption said, "We're tired of the same recipes. You're next." I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days. I covered the windows, unplugged everything, and turned off my phone. But I knew it was useless. They were already inside. I wasn't hiding. I was being watched. Then the door buzzed. I didn't move. I waited, barely breathing. The buzzing stopped. 10 minutes later, a knock. Slow, heavy. A plastic envelope slid under the door. I opened it. Inside was a photo of my sister tied to a chair, gagged, crying. I tried to call her. No signal. The number was dead. I packed my bag and followed the address they sent. It was in the woods. The house was isolated. 1 floor, no cars. I walked inside. It smelled like antiseptic. Too clean. A single camera on a tripod. A table already set. In the center, a close. I lifted it and saw a human tongue, still wet. Next to it, a receipt. 1 item. Chef Reggie, main course. They had been prepping me all along. I wasn't the cook anymore. I was the meat. I turned to run, but the door had locked. Every window was reinforced. A vent opened above me. Gas started leaking into the room. My eyes burned. I fell to the floor, choking. Before I passed out, I saw a red light blinking on the camera. They were filming, live. I woke up on a metal table, shirtless, arms and legs strapped down. Someone was sharpening a cleaver at the end of the room. He wore a chef's hat, mine. The cameras were already rolling, pointed straight at me. I begged, I screamed. They didn't kill me. The whole setup, the cleaver, the gas, the table, was just a message. I woke up in a different room, stripped, but alive, bruised, but whole. No missing parts, no deep cuts. They wanted to remind me that I wasn't in control anymore. Not the chef, not the product, just property. I was still valuable, and they weren't done using me. The same day, they flew me to another location. New kitchen, new knives, same rules. Now they take me everywhere. I don't ask where. I don't ask who. I cook what they send. Sometimes it's a woman crying in a chair. Sometimes it's a boy gagged and shaking. I prep, I plate, I smile at the fucking cameras. I don't do it for the money. That stopped mattering after they showed me a live feed of my mom hooked to machines. My sister locked in a room with no windows. They're still alive. They breathe because I keep cooking. If I stop, they die. That's the deal. That's all that's left.
I live in a small apartment in a random city. I work as a systems technician, a very boring job that I honestly couldn't stand, but it served me well for the moment. My dream was to be a video game programmer, and soon I would get there. In the meantime, I made do with the little I had. My routine was simple: work, go home, and get lost in the internet until I fell asleep. I always considered myself a very quiet person with a very low profile, but something inside me wanted more. I felt that I would never fulfill my dream. I would never be anything if I didn't encourage myself to at least do something different. Although I didn't. Sometimes I got bored of surfing the same old social networks and forums, so I started to look into the deep web. I knew it was a place full of strange things, rumors of the forbidden. It was like an instinct to do something different. The fact that it was forbidden excited me. I felt like I was breaking the rules for the first time. Beyond that, I didn't take it seriously. To me, it was just another corner of the internet where people exaggerated stories to scare others, but still, it made me feel good. I started with the basics. Tutorials on how to access a secure browser, sites with catalogs of banned books, and forums full of discussions that looked like something out of a conspiracy movie. But I didn't find anything particularly disturbing until I saw a link that had no description, just a random ID number. I clicked it without thinking. The link took me to a simple, almost empty forum. Its design was basic with a black background and white text. There were a few topics, most of them closed. One of them was active, marked with a strange symbol, an eye made with rough lines. I went inside. Inside, a video and a message that said, "Watch this if you're still here after. You're part of it." The video started. It showed a dreary room with concrete walls lit by a single yellowish spotlight. In the center was a chair, and in the chair, a man bound with ropes. He had a black hood over his head. Several seconds passed with nothing happening, and I was about to close it when someone appeared in the frame. He wore a featureless white mask, except for some holes in the eyes. Without speaking, the masked man walked toward the bound man. The video ended there abruptly. I felt a shudder, but convinced myself it was a joke. I closed the page and turned off the computer. I thought no more about it until my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number that said, "You know too much now. Watch your step, Jason." My blood ran cold. I couldn't remember using my name anywhere. The next few days were a torment. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't get that message out of my head. I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, a practical joke from someone who tracked my IP. I didn't think anyone would go to the trouble of coming to my house. How many people would go into that place? However, things started to get strange. The first sign was that my computer stopped working. When I tried to turn it on, the screen showed only a black background with a line of text. No peeking. Then other messages started appearing. "Wait for us. We will meet soon," or "We are watching you." Just in case, I deactivated the webcam of the camera. I didn't know how to fix it without losing all the data on the hard drive. I didn't really believe the hackers, but the damage to my computer had been real, and in itself, that was already too annoying because it was very difficult to work from the notebook. One night, while checking the building's security cameras from my phone, I saw something that made me freeze. At 3:00 a.m., someone was walking slowly down the hallway in front of my door. He was wearing a white mask, just like the one in the video. He never touched my door. He just walked by, stopping for a few seconds in front of it before disappearing. At that moment, everything took on a different dimension. I was terrified. I stopped leaving the house except to go grocery shopping. I checked the locks 3 times before going to sleep. I blocked the windows with furniture, convinced that someone might come in. But I couldn't help it. I felt like I was being watched. This wasn't even paranormal. I was in too deep. If these men went to the trouble of coming, did it mean that I had gotten into a deep web game? Could this mean that they were spectators waiting to kill me? I thought that the mask could be just a coincidence, but it wasn't innocent either. It was too much of a coincidence. One night, I found an envelope under the door. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photo. It was me, asleep in my bed. The picture was taken from inside my apartment. How the hell had they gotten in? Through a window I might have left open? Through the ceiling? Something snapped inside me. It was no longer paranoia. I was being hunted. I tried to go to the police, but I didn't know where to start. What was I going to tell them? That someone on the deep web was messing with me? I stopped using my phone and disconnected everything from the internet. I went to sleep for a few nights in a hotel until I had everything figured out. I thought if I isolated myself, they would lose interest. But it was worse. That same night, someone knocked on my door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was loud, rhythmic knocking as if they wanted to make sure I heard them. The knocking stopped, and an awkward silence fell over the place. I approached the door quietly, trying to hear something. That's when I heard it. "We know you're in there, Jason. Let us in." "You know we can come in if we want to, but we're asking you to open the door for us." "Don't make it more complicated, Jason. Open up." I froze, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly and saw someone standing in the corner of the room. It was him, The white mask. He carried no visible weapons, but his mere presence was enough to paralyze me. He walked towards me without hurry, while I backed up until I bumped into the wall. I tried to speak, to ask him to leave, but my voice wouldn't come out. When he was in front of me, he pulled a knife from his pocket. He did not speak. He simply watched me for what seemed like eternal minutes, until he placed the blade against my arm and pressed. The pain was excruciating. I fell to the ground, but he didn't stop. He picked me up forcefully and threw me onto the couch. Then he pulled out his phone and started recording. Smile, Jason. You're part of the file now. I couldn't move. Fear and pain had completely paralyzed me. The man approached the door as if knowing I would not escape, and opened it. From there, 2 other men came in. They all came back to me, and while one grabbed the phone to film, and the other stood by and did nothing, the first attacker took his time, slowly cutting my arms while the other recorded everything with his phone. Ah! Stop! It hurts!
Do you know why we picked you, Jason?
For getting on that page.
No, that page was made for you. You would have entered it anyway.
Then why?
Because no one will miss you.
You're a useless fat guy who spends his days locked up. You'll never do anything you want to do. Life will pass you by and nothing will change. And that was the preamble. The man spent the whole night torturing me, beating me, and saying horrible things to me. When the night came to an end, he stopped recording. He took one last look at me before he hit me over the head with the butt of the knife. Before I finished passing out, they said one more thing to me. We are not heroes, Jason.
We want you to stay pathetic.
If you do something to fix your life, we'll be back. When I woke up, I was in my apartment. On the table, someone had left a USB. I didn't have the heart to look at it. I called the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing strange. They treated me like a madman, someone who had lost touch with reality and perhaps had injured himself. I moved out soon after, but I know it's no use. Today, I have one more excuse to do nothing. I am terrified that if I want to do the things I like, they will come back and kill me. Money issues were everything in my life. Every morning started with the same routine, checking what little food was left and deciding which meal I could skip without passing out. I wasn't dramatic about it, but hunger changes how you think. It narrows your world until everything revolves around surviving the next few hours. The blood donation center wasn't something I searched for. It appeared in my path because I was already desperate enough to notice it. A small place, clean enough, offering food in exchange for blood. Not money, food. That detail mattered more than anything else at the time because it meant I could eat that same day. I didn't feel heroic or generous lying on that chair. I felt tired and embarrassed, staring at the ceiling while my arm went numb. When they handed me the sandwich and the juice, I ate standing up, barely tasting it. That was when I understood I could come back as many times as they let me. A few nights later, while browsing forums filled with things I didn't fully understand, I found a post that didn't belong anywhere else. It talked about private blood donations, high payments, no clinics involved. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, because some part of me already knew I was going to click. Before opening the page, I sat there, listening to my own breathing and the noise of my old computer fan. There was no excitement in that moment, only the weight of knowing that once I opened it, I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. That pause was the last clean moment I remember. The sight was simple, almost cold, almost empty, like it didn't want attention. It explained everything without decoration. Fresh blood only, collected at home, stored correctly, left in my mailbox at an exact time. Any delay would ruin the product and create problems. They didn't explain what those problems were. That lack of detail created a pressure that stayed with me. It wasn't fear yet, but it was close. The instructions were clear enough to feel professional, and that made them worse. This wasn't some random scam. It was organized. When I emailed them, the response came back almost immediately. They sent a list of supplies I had to buy and instructions so detailed they felt rehearsed. The payment amount was shocking. Enough to cover food, rent, and still have something left. I told myself I'd do it once just to get back on my feet. The first night I prepared everything, my apartment felt smaller than usual. I cleaned the table carefully, not out of pride, but because the instructions insisted on it. I kept reading them, afraid of missing something that would cost me the payment or worse. Before inserting the needle, I sat there for several minutes, staring at my arm. That pause stretched heavy and uncomfortable because my body clearly didn't want this, even if my mind had already decided. I forced myself to continue because stopping meant going back to hunger. The blood flowed slow at first, then steadier. I focused on breathing and keeping my hands from shaking. When the bag was full, I sealed it exactly as instructed, packed it with the cooling material, and placed it in the mailbox with my heart beating faster than it should have. The waiting afterward was unbearable. Every sound outside made me tense. When the mailbox was empty the next morning and the payment arrived shortly after, relief washed over me hard enough to make my legs weak. That relief is what trapped me. They asked for more blood the next time, offering even more money. I noticed my arm bruised faster. My recovery took longer, but I ignored it. Each successful pickup made the process feel normal, and that scared me more than the needles. Weeks passed, and my body began to protest in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. I woke up dizzy, my hands shaking, my legs heavy. Eating helped less each time, and sleeping didn't reset anything. I was always tired, no matter how much rest I got. Before each donation, there was a growing tension that filled the room. My breathing slowed, my mouth went dry, and my hands hesitated over the supplies. That moment before starting became longer every time because my body clearly understood something my mind refused to accept. The emails changed tone. They stopped thanking me. They started monitoring me. They commented on the quality and quantity of my blood, suggesting improvements like hydration schedules and rest periods. The payments kept increasing, making it harder to justify stopping. When I learned the blood was being consumed, not processed, my stomach turned. That knowledge stuck with me during every donation afterward, making the act feel heavier and more invasive. Still, I continued because stopping meant losing everything I had rebuilt. When I finally told them I was done, my message was short and desperate. I explained I was sick, weak, and couldn't continue. The reply came back colder than anything before. They told me stopping wasn't an option and that continued cooperation was expected. I disconnected my computer that night, convincing myself that disappearing would solve it. That illusion didn't last long. I woke up with my arm aching and my mouth painfully dry, unable to move. The moment I realized I was restrained didn't bring panic immediately. It brought confusion so intense it drowned everything else. My eyes moved slowly across the room, noticing the straps, the tubes, the bags filling beside me. Other beds surrounded mine, each holding someone in a similar state. Figures moved between them wearing medical clothing that felt wrong. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me as a person, only as a process that needed to continue. Every extraction left me weaker. They took blood until my vision blurred, then left me alone just long enough to recover enough for the next round. Time lost meaning. I lived in cycles of pain, emptiness, and brief moments of false rest. At some point, I stopped feeling fully alive. My body existed only to be drained and stabilized. Thoughts came slower. Memories blurred. I expected death constantly, and that expectation became routine. Then the routine broke. Sounds echoed through the facility that didn't belong there. Shouting, running, metal crashing. The figures stopped coming, and fear filled the silence they left behind. The door burst open violently, lights flooding the room. Police voices filled the space, loud and shocked. Hands cut my restraints and lifted me carefully, reacting visibly to my condition. I drifted in and out of consciousness after that. Hospital lights replaced the cold ceiling. Doctors talked around me, not to me. I learned later that I was found barely alive, malnourished, and close to organ failure. Recovery took longer than anyone expected. My body healed slowly, but my mind never caught up. Simple noises made me tense. Any medical environment made my chest tighten. I tried to rebuild my life, piece by piece, but everything felt fragile. Trust became impossible. I avoided people, systems, and anything that promised easy solutions. I survived, but survival didn't feel like a victory. It felt like being left behind after something had already taken the best parts of me. Even now, I wake up checking my arms, half expecting to see tubes again.
I was the night shift doctor, alone in the north wing. The others had gone home hours ago. No patients here, just the break room, a few dark hallways, and my office. It was supposed to be a quiet night. I had my coffee, my laptop, and a stack of files. The heater rattled softly, the old vending machine hummed in the corner, and the clock ticked too loud. I didn't realize how much I hated the silence until the power cut out. The lights snapped off without warning. Not the whole hospital, just this wing. Everything went dark. The vending machine stopped, the heater died, and the glow from my laptop disappeared. For a second, I sat frozen, staring into the blackness, trying to understand if it was a normal outage. My gut twisted. Something felt wrong. I pulled out my phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi. My fingers moved fast, unlocking the door and stepping into the hallway. But the moment I did, I regretted it. It was like stepping into a void. The break room door was locked, windows sealed shut. I was on the second floor. No escape. I told myself to stay calm, but my hands were already shaking. I paced back to my office, checking my phone again and again. Still no signal. I sat down, trying to think, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Not one or two, but several, echoing down the black hall. My breath caught. My first thought was security, but they weren't calling out, weren't using flashlights, just walking, hunting. I crept to the door, peeking through the cracked frame. 3 figures moved smoothly past, dressed in black, not hesitating. They weren't lost. They weren't checking for people. They were looking for me. My chest tightened and I backed away, locking the door. My brain raced, trying to figure out who they were. Cops? No. Thieves? Maybe. But why here? A bang down the hall made me jump. They were breaking into rooms one by one. I slid under my desk, gripping the edge, squeezing my eyes shut for a second. The doorknob rattled. My pulse roared in my ears. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't prepared to survive this kind of night. A sharp kick hit the door, shaking the frame. I saw the outline of one man through the frosted glass. He wasn't yelling, wasn't demanding I open up. He was patient, cold. He pulled something from his pocket, worked the lock. My fists clenched as I slid under the desk, heart thudding so loud I was sure they could hear it. The lock clicked. The door creaked open, and Boots stepped in. Heavy, slow, deliberate. He kicked a chair, checked behind a cabinet, breathing steady. I bit my lip hard, eyes locked on the Boots moving closer. He crouched down, eyes meeting mine under the desk. My body jolted into action, shoving hard against the desk, sending him stumbling back as I bolted from the room. I sprinted down the hall, legs burning, lungs on fire. I could hear their feet pounding behind me, fast, determined. Every door I passed was locked, every turn felt like a trap. My mind screamed at me to keep going, even as panic closed in like a fist around my throat. I had no plan, just the raw, blind urge to survive. I tore around a corner, but one of them was already there, blocking the way. I slammed into him, struggling, shoving, trying to break free. His fist slammed into my ribs. Pain exploded through my side. I staggered, pushed past him, stumbling into the next hallway. Behind me, angry voices barked orders, feet pounded faster. My chest heaved. I was running out of time. The break room loomed ahead again, still locked. I spun, heart hammering, back pressing against the wall. One of the men approached slowly, calmly, pulling a syringe from his pocket, the needle glinting in the faint light. My breath came in ragged gasps as I shook my head, trying to back away, but the wall pressed cold against my spine. "Easy, Doc. You don't want to make this harder." I clenched my fists, then lunged, slapping the syringe from his hand. He cursed, grabbing for me, but I ducked under his arm, bolting back down the hall. My legs screamed, feet slipping on the floor as I pushed myself harder, lungs straining, every nerve screaming, but I wasn't fast enough. Another man kicked at my legs, sending me sprawling, head cracking against the cold tile. Pain bloomed, sharp and hot, as hands yanked me back. One pinned me down, another jammed the syringe into my arm. Cold liquid burned under my skin. Panic roared in my chest, but I swung an elbow back, catching one in the face. A sharp grunt, a curse, and I shoved up, breaking free. I stumbled, dizzy, vision swimming. My legs felt like lead. I clawed at the walls, forcing myself toward the only place I knew, my office. They shouted behind me, boots slamming hard on the floor. My chest heaved, vision narrowing, but I refused to stop. I crashed into my office, slamming the door behind me. My hands fumbled at the window latch, breath ragged, heart racing. I could hear them outside, shouting, kicking at the door. My fingers slipped, vision blurring, but I forced the latch open, shoving the window wide. Cold air rushed in, biting my face, jolting me slightly awake. I climbed up, body swaying. My limbs felt heavy, but adrenaline shoved me forward. The door burst open behind me. A man lunging forward, grabbing my ankle, yanking me hard. I kicked wildly, barely keeping hold on the frame. His grip tightened, and I knew I had seconds. Summoning everything left in me, I twisted violently, tearing free, and hurled myself out the window. The cold night air blasted me as the ground rushed up. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, pain exploding through my side. I lay in the snow, gasping, blinking up at the dark sky. Shapes loomed above me, white coats, shouting voices. Then everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, machines beeping softly, light stabbing into my eyes. A colleague sat by my side, face drawn with worry. He told me they found something strange in my system, something they couldn't identify. He stayed the night, said I was lucky to be alive. Later, the police came, asking questions, scribbling in their notepads. I told them about the 3 men, about the syringe, and about the chase. They promised to track him down, to keep me safe. I smiled, thanked them, told them how grateful I was it was all over. The hospital staff, the police, even my colleagues sitting by my bed, they saw me as a victim, a lucky survivor. They thought I was clean, innocent, just another doctor caught in something bigger than himself. They were so wrong. You see, I knew about those 3 men. Those were white-hat hackers. They were trying to shut down my operation. They knew what I do. They knew who I am. They know I was about to leave, and they ruined their only chance to get me. I've been running this business for years. Sometimes I told them to take terminal patients, other times healthy ones without families. Those people are from a red room. I feed the deep web what it craves. Real suffering, real blood, real death. And the people paying? They pay millions to watch. And now I've been doing this enough time to become filthy rich. Did you really think you were watching a story about survival? About a good man under attack? Were you rooting for me? That's adorable. Now I have enough money to disappear. No one will find me. Not the police, not the hackers, no one. You can take this story as my confession, or you can also take it as the words of a criminal celebrating that he is unpunished. I don't care what you think. You only need to know that I won. Good night.
If you ask me what the most dangerous place in the world is, I wouldn't say a war zone, a dark forest, or the side of a cliff. My answer would be the dark web. Why, do you ask? Well, let me tell you my story. I'm Emily, And this is how the deep web changed my life forever. 3 years ago, I met Mike. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party. I was just 23 back then, and he was well into his late 30s. I was surprised to see someone so old at the birthday party of a 22-year-old, but there he was in his tux, looking completely out of place. Maya, my friend whose birthday it was the daughter of Mike's business friend. The moment we spoke, butterflies didn't flutter in my stomach, nor did sparks fly when I ended up in his bed that night. But something was clear. Mike was lonely and wealthy, a perfect combination for my future husband. I wanted to launch my own business one day, and Mike would be a great help in my venture. With this thought in mind, I started dating him. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Exactly a year later, he proposed to me, and I said yes, obviously. I must admit, I never loved Mike, but he adored me. For me, he was a safety net for my future, and his mild attractiveness did not hurt. But merely weeks after our marriage, Mike changed. At first, it was subtle, like asking me where I was going all the time, calling me several times while I was out to check on me. Then he started controlling my finances, asking every time how much I spent and with whom I was hanging out with. His behavior was less loving and more controlling, as if he tried to own me. Life felt less free and more suffocating with him. He made me account for every penny I spent. It was as if the Mike I had married had completely changed and turned into a controlling husband. Around our 6-month anniversary, I hit my breaking point when I caught Mike checking my phone. He was snooping, trying to find God knows what in my cell phone. I swear, even if I didn't love him, I never once thought about cheating on him. He was my only husband and partner. But when I saw him showing distrust in me, I lost it. I knew if I wanted his money and property, there was only one way to get it all: by getting rid of Mike. That night as he slept, I browsed the deep web. A friend of mine had mentioned getting illegal weapons on it, so I knew I would find help there. After about an hour of browsing, I found a site that had a hitman on demand. No questions asked. I instantly logged into the site and was connected to a potential hitman. He only specified his code name, Brass Knuckles, and that 57 jobs were completed successfully. He asked only 3 questions: who, when, and where. I gave him Mike's details and his photo. The hitman, Brass Knuckles, said he would figure out the rest. 2 weeks later, I received an anonymous text on my phone. Job will be in motion tonight, in your house. Stay out till the wee hours of the morning. I immediately knew that the hitman had a plan in motion. I had transferred $2 million in crypto to a wallet the hitman had mentioned earlier. That night, one of my friends had invited me to a cocktail party, and I'd planned to stall there for as long as possible. Around 11 p.m., when I was on my 3rd drink and checking my phone for messages from the hitman, my phone had finally dinged. It was Mike calling me. I ignored the calls as I knew why he was calling me. Exactly. Looks like Brass Knuckles was doing his job. Mike called me around 12 times and I ignored every one of his calls. But exactly an hour later, I got a message that had my interest. Job done. Return any time. That's all the message said. I bid farewell to all my friends and then drove home. By the time I got there, it was around 2 a.m. I entered my home and there was a trail of blood right from the front door leading to the living room. I clutched my purse to my chest and pretended to be scared. I yelled out Mike's name and ran to the living room. The whole home was covered by CCTV cameras, and I wanted the cops to know that I was terrified. He wasn't in the living room, and a trail of blood led me to our upstairs bedroom. But the second I entered the bedroom, which had no CCTVs, My heart leaped out of my chest. There, sitting on a chair, was my husband, Mike, living and thriving as the day he was born, and beside him was the hitman I had ordered off the deep web. Brass Knuckles looked like a man in his late 40s with a gun in his hand and a scar running across his old face. Both of the men were smirking at me. "What's going on?" I was so confused. "Well, it turns out I was double booked today," Brass Knuckles said and pointed the gun at me. "I loved you. I married you. I gave you the comforts that you never had, and you repay me like this?" Mike shouted, pointing at the hitman. I can explain. This was a huge misunderstanding." I tried to smooth things out, but the hitman fired at the wall behind me, and I just shut up. I told him everything. He, Brass Knuckles, said, and tears flowed from my cheeks. The next thing I knew, he was moving towards me with a raised hand. And then everything went dark. I woke up in the hospital with cops surrounding my bed. That was 2 weeks later, and my hand was patched up, and so was most of my face and head. Mike was nowhere in sight. That's when the detective told me that I was accused of trying to kill my husband by hiring a hitman. My deep web history was the proof, and the hitman himself, Brass Knuckles, was testifying against me. Mike had told the cops that I was unstable and jealous, accused me of doing everything that he did to me, and paid the hitman to assault me instead. It was an open and shut case. And now, here I am in jail, with lifetime imprisonment for the crimes I almost committed.
I hadn't heard from David in 11 months when he sent me the message. No explanation, no small talk, just a set of GPS coordinates, a date, and don't be late. That was it. No location name, no actual address. I almost didn't go. But David had always been strange, and the way he dropped off the map after college left too many unanswered questions. Curiosity won. Stupid move. His place was buried deep in the woods outside of Tacoma. Unmarked roads, no phone signal, nothing but trees. His house was old, falling apart, and it looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The porch had broken boards, the windows were caked with grime, and one of the upper panes was shattered but covered in duct tape from the inside. His car was parked off to the side, but there were no lights on. I knocked, waited. The silence was off. I pushed the door, unlocked. Inside, the smell hit first. Like bleach and rotting meat had been stirred together and left to stew for days. The floors were sticky. Stains were everywhere. Not the kind from spilled wine or oil. These were dark and soaked into the wood. I called his name but got nothing. I walked deeper into the house toward the only room with light. The door was open. I stopped at the frame. David was there, sitting at a desk surrounded by screens. At least 6 of them. He didn't turn when I stepped in, just stared at the monitors. They were playing grainy videos. Some looked like old VHS footage. All showed people, alone, tied up, some screaming, some limp. He was smiling. I tried to laugh it off, told him he'd lost it, but David didn't even blink. He just reached for a notebook, scribbled something, then stood and walked past me without saying a word. I hesitated, then followed. I didn't want to go deeper into that place, but I also didn't want to be alone with the videos. He led me up creaky stairs, turning corners like he knew I'd follow. His steps were too calm. Every door we passed had deadbolts and metal hinges. On the outside, I asked him what he was doing. No answer. He stopped at the last door at the end of the hall and opened it. No hesitation. Then walked away back down the stairs. The room was dark, but light from the hallway spilled in. I leaned in to look. I shouldn't have. She was on the bed, his wife. What was left of her. Her face was black blue, one eye socket empty, her hands were bent backward, fingers missing. She'd been dead for days. The mattress was soaked and the wall behind her was covered in scratch marks. I stumbled back, slammed the door, and threw up on the hallway carpet. I went down the stairs, yelling for him. Nothing. The house was silent again. I tried the front door. Locked. I hadn't locked it. I yanked every window in sight. Nailed shut. Thick nails, deep into the wood. Then I saw it. A small black camera in the corner of the room, its red light on, pointed right at me. The lens moved, tracking. I backed into the kitchen. More cameras. Hidden, but not enough. Every room was under surveillance. Every door locked from the outside. Then I realized what this was. I hadn't been invited. I'd been delivered. I ran back to the room with the monitor. Some of the feeds were live now. One showed the hallway I had just run through. Another showed the bedroom upstairs with her corpse, static crawling across the image. The third showed the kitchen. Me, watching myself in real time. There was no sound, just a faint hum coming from the server stacked behind the desk. I started yanking cords. Nothing changed. The tension in my body was rising fast, my hands trembling as I tried to think. Every screen I unplugged, another one flickered on from somewhere else in the house. I smashed one with a stool. Its image blinked and reappeared on the screen to the left. I shouted for David, screamed at the cameras, but there was no reply. Just the click of something unlocking behind me. I turned. A closet door creaked open. Nothing inside but a single small speaker. Then David's voice came through. Calm, cold, like he was reading a bedtime story. He said I was now part of the feed, that I'd been chosen, that his viewers had paid a lot for tonight's stream. I shouted back, told him to go to hell. He laughed, said I should smile more. Then he began reading comments, real ones, from people watching. One said, make him crawl. Another said, let him scream first. He was performing, not for me, for them. His voice sharpened. He told me if I ran, they'd see more. If I fought, they'd pay more. Then the lights cut out. Total darkness, except for the monitors still glowing. The house went quiet again. Not silent, quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that breathes with you. I moved fast, stepping away from the monitors and into the hallway, feeling the walls for anything I could use. I found a fire extinguisher under the sink. That was it. No weapons, no phone, nothing. Then I heard the footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from above. I backed into the pantry and crouched, clutching the extinguisher like it would help. I didn't blink. His steps moved across the ceiling, then stopped. I waited, my muscles locked up from holding still so long. Then came a sound I can't forget. A dragging chain clinking against wood, followed by a door creaking open. He spoke again, but this time not through the speaker. He was closer, said he had a surprise for me, that it was time to play, that if I could survive for 15 minutes, the door would unlock. Said the viewers liked games with rules. Then he started a countdown. I don't know if it was real or if he made it up. Either way, I started running. I made it to the back room. It was empty except for a cage in the corner and hooks on the ceiling. Blood still wet on the drain. I grabbed a metal pipe. It was slippery, cold. Then I heard him laugh from the hallway. The lights turned red. He was coming. I tried to stay low, moved through the rooms fast, staying out of sight from the cameras. I found a broken mirror and used a shard as a blade. Pathetic, but it felt better than nothing. His voice came over the speaker again, playful now. He said I reminded him of a dog he once tortured. That the dog begged, too. That it didn't help. He kicked the door open. I heard it slam into the wall. He was coming through rooms faster now. The cameras followed me wherever I went. I could hear the viewers in my head like they were whispering right behind me. I reached the basement stairs and ran down. It was colder than the rest of the house. Darker, too. The basement was worse than I could have imagined. Chains hanging from the ceiling, dried blood on the walls, racks of tapes all labeled. Some names, some just dates. There were tools, not hammers or knives, but things I couldn't even name. Hooks, saws, clamps. I found a rusted machete and held it tight. My hands were shaking. Then David appeared. He didn't run, he walked down like he owned the place. He had a knife in one hand and his phone in the other. He was filming. I screamed and rushed him. We clashed in the dark. He swung, I blocked. He cut my forearm, deep. I hit him in the ribs. He stabbed my shoulder. I jammed the machete into his thigh. He screamed, fell back. Blood everywhere. But he didn't stop. He reached for something behind him. I grabbed a chain and swung it hard across his face. It cracked against his skull. He dropped the knife and fell to the floor, twitching. I didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. I took his phone, ran upstairs, and locked the basement behind me. My blood was all over the walls. My shoulder burned like fire. But I made it to the front door. It was wide open. Red and blue lights flooded the porch. Cops yelled, guns raised. I dropped the phone and collapsed. One of them pulled me out, cuffed me, asked if I was armed. I just laughed. Didn't have the strength to talk. They went inside and found David unconscious. Found her body upstairs. Found the cameras, the tools, the whole operation. They said it was the worst live stream they'd ever seen. Over 10,000 people had tuned in, all anonymous. All gone once the feed died. His wife had been killed 4 days earlier. Her death had been part of the first stream. I had been the main event. David survived. He's in a psychiatric facility now. He doesn't talk, just stares at the walls. They said his mind broke before the arrest, maybe before the first kill. The recordings were real. Everything on the tapes was verified. Most victims are still unidentified. They traced the feed to a private hub on the deep web, encrypted beyond belief. Law enforcement shut it down, but clones pop up every week. People still ask for the feed, still post screenshots. Some claim I was part of it, that I helped him, that I escaped too easily. I live in a motel now. Different name, different state. Every night I check under the bed, behind the door. I haven't slept a full night since. But what really gets me is this. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear a voice behind me. Calm, cold, reading comments that aren't supposed to exist anymore. And sometimes I feel the red light turn on. This story is based on the crimes of David Kalak, an American man who murdered his girlfriend Amber Lynn Copeland in 2014. After killing her in their shared apartment in Port Orchard, Washington, he photographed her body and uploaded the images to a forum associated with the deep web. The photos were accompanied by chilling messages hinting at future murders. Kalak fled the scene and triggered a multi-state manhunt before finally turning himself in. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to 82 years in prison. What most people don't know is that Kalak wasn't acting alone. Behind the viral headlines and the trial, some details were never made public, including a live stream known among deep web users as The Feed. Witnesses, videos, and fragments of conversations point to a setup far more disturbing than a single murder. This story follows one of the few survivors tied to Kalak's circle, someone who got too close, saw too much, and barely made it out alive.
I can still remember the tenderness of my little brother's skin as I bit down on his arm during a fight we had when I was 12. The softness of his flesh against my teeth and the metallic taste of his blood on my tongue were euphoric, and it was that moment that changed my life forever. The psychologists call it Wendigo psychosis, but the actual term was pathological cannibalism. I can never forget the horrid look on my mother's face as Brenda, my childhood psychologist, told her that I was going to struggle with pathological cannibalism, an extremely rare but real issue that sometimes occurs due to underlying psychiatric disorders or problems. Even though I was so young, I could tell everyone around me thought I was a monster. What made things even worse was that none of the many psychologists my mother dragged me to knew how to handle my issue, because cases involving pathological cannibalistic impulses were extraordinarily rare, and there was little to no knowledge about my condition. My mother often told me that I wasn't always like this, but she could see the signs, as my strange behavior all started when I was 7. During that age, I started showing signs of extreme alatriophagy, a disorder where a person repeatedly eats or consumes things that aren't normally considered food. I would consume everything from my hair to my fingernails, and I would struggle with my mother when she quickly took these things out of my mouth before I could swallow. I would even throw tantrums whenever she tried to stop me. Things only got worse from there, as when I was 10, I developed another condition called dermatophagia, a condition where a person compulsively bites their own skin, drawing blood. I would leave deep marks on my arms, hands, and fingers, and there were cases where my mother had to rush me to the hospital to stop the bleeding. After an examination, the psychologist told my parents that I'd developed a disturbing body-focused repetitive behavior. They made several attempts to fix my peculiar case of BFRB with self-biting behavior, as they tried everything they could to stop me from doing it. In the end, all their efforts failed, and it wasn't long before my disorders eventually turned into full-blown autophagia, which is the morbid act of consuming one's own flesh. The new condition was basically an extreme form of dermatophagia, as rather than simply biting down on my skin to draw blood, I began to tear out and eat my own flesh. A little while after I turned 12, my mother found me bleeding on the floor with a huge patch of flesh missing from my leg. I had disassociated due to my psychiatric illness and cut off parts of my own skin using a sharp knife. I can still remember the disgust on my mother's face as she found me sitting there with a mouthful of my own flesh. Later that same month, my older brother Kevin tried to stop me from hurting myself again so I wouldn't eat my flesh or bite myself, and I didn't let him. So we got into a huge fight, and I bit him. It was at that moment that I got a sick epiphany, as I realized that it would be much better to eat other people to satiate this never-ending hunger for flesh. It was a sick revelation, but even at that young age, I knew that it was much better than eating my own flesh. It was at this point that my childhood psychologist, Brenda, diagnosed me with pathological cannibalism that I talked about earlier. She told my parents that all the disorders I developed throughout my early childhood were leading up to this, and she assured my parents that she'd help me overcome the pathology, which she often referred to as Wendigo psychosis. But even after hours of examinations and therapy sessions, she or any of the following psychologists weren't able to help me. It's hard to put the feelings into words, but I've always felt like there was something sinister living inside of me. A monster that was always whispering in my ear and urging me to sink my teeth into my own flesh just so I could taste my skin and the metallic flavor of the blood that flowed. I always tried my best to fight back, but these feelings were overwhelming, even when I was a child. However, after I viciously bit my brother's arm, the voice changed the words it used to whisper, as it was now telling me to eat and consume everyone around me. I often suffered identity shifts and memory gaps, during which I would commit even more atrocious cannibalistic acts. When I was much older, my psychologist told me that the core motor cluster of psychiatric disorders I'd been suffering from due to my neurological abnormalities had gotten a lot worse with age. They said my cannibalistic urges had become paraphilic, which could unfortunately lead to even more frequent psychosis-driven behavioral escalation, and they urged me to take some medication to subdue my severe paraphilic disorders. I was given several high-dose antipsychotics like olanzapine, risperidone, and haloperidol to treat the underlying psychosis. I was then told that these drugs would help fix and subdue most of the paraphilic disorders and psychiatric illnesses. But no matter how many pills I took, my compulsive urges never fully went away. I secretly lived with these urges, carrying them around like they were a badge of shame. I eventually fell into a deep depression and reached a new low point in my life. But it was around this time that my mother had a long, deep talk with me about my issues, and she told me that I was stronger than my disorders, so I shouldn't let the urges control my life. From that moment on, I made a conscious decision to change my life. I went to college for 4 years and got a good-paying job. I even started dating, and I eventually married my beautiful wife, Claire, who gave birth to a son we named Philip. It took me several years of struggle to get my life to that point, and even though I felt like I'd achieved what I set out to do, the voice of that monster was still there. I eventually stopped taking my antipsychotics out of anger because I assumed they weren't working anymore, as I could occasionally hear the voice telling me to rip apart the flesh of my wife, Claire, while she was asleep. I felt like I didn't need them anymore, as I told myself that the love for my family would help me overcome my urges. But I was wrong, as the voices just got louder. I knew it was only a matter of time before my disorders got out of hand again, and I didn't want to dissociate and hurt my family, as I knew I would never forgive myself. So I desperately looked for an outlet, and it wasn't long before I came across the infamous Cannibals Cafe forum on the dark web. I heard about it before, but I didn't think it was real. I'd also seen some people online saying that the original site, which used to be on the internet during the late 90s, had been taken down, so I thought there was no other way to access it. However, one night when the voices had become unbearable as they were constantly urging me to carry out sadistic acts, I downloaded the Tor browser to access the dark web, and I eventually came across a dark web forum called Cannibals Cafe. I was confused, as I knew the original Cannibal Cafe website on the ClearNet had been shut down around 2002. However, I later found out from members of the exclusive forum that even though both forums shared the same name, this particular dark web forum was inspired by and modeled after the original Cannibal Cafe. This dark web forum felt like my salvation, as it allowed me to talk about things my psychologist didn't understand with other like-minded cannibals on the forum. I logged on and talked to other members of the forum every night after my wife had gone to bed. There was a small part of me that knew what I was doing was wrong, but every minute I spent on that forum made me feel like I had finally found a place where I belonged. It really seemed like I was a recovering alcoholic who had just walked into a wine tasting event. But in this case, the alcoholism was cannibalism, and the wine tasters were connoisseurs of human flesh who constantly validated my desires by telling me I wasn't wrong for feeling this way. All of the anonymous people on the Cannibals Cafe forum became an avenue for me to vent and channel my urges. The voices grew much louder now, but I was fine with it because I came across an anonymous individual whose username was Maywest Disciple 783, and he told me that I should embrace the monster I believed was inside of me. I met Maywest Disciple 783 about a month after I started visiting the Cannibals Cafe forum, and we grew very close. We were both huge fans of the Rotenberg cannibal, a German man named Armin Maywest who consumed parts of another man named Bernd Brandes. Maywest was a cannibal like us, and in the year 2001, he posted an ad on the internet looking for a willing participant who would allow him to consume their body and fulfill his cannibalistic desires. Bernd Brandes saw the ad and agreed to do it. After meeting Maywest, both men severed Bernd's genitalia and ate it. Unfortunately, Bernd later died, but Armin Maywest did not let his corpse go to waste, as he consumed parts of the body before he was unjustly thrown in prison. Maywest Disciple 783 and I had a lengthy conversation about how unjust the incarceration of Armin Maywest was, and we even spoke about pooling some money together so we could buy the alleged tape of Maywest eating Bernd's corpse that's somewhere out there on the dark web. After we bonded over our shared love for Armin Maywest, I began to text Maywest Disciple 783 for hours on end. We eventually made our own private dark web forum called Cannibals Anonymous, where we would talk about our desires, and he told me that I shouldn't try to silence the voice in my head with the high-dose antipsychotics that psychologists had told me to start taking again. He told me to accept the words the little voice in my head kept whispering, because there was nothing wrong with eating one another if it was consensual. The more we talked, the more I believed that the anonymous man behind Maywest Disciple 783 was the only person in the world who truly understood me. We spent most of our free time texting back and forth during the months that followed, and one Saturday, Maywest Disciple 783 sent me a message that would once again alter the course of my life moving forward. He suggested that we both fulfill our desires like Maywest and Brandes, and that we should set a date and a location where we could consensually eat parts of each other's flesh. I was ecstatic because I'd never had a willing individual offer me parts of their flesh to consume, and I remember telling myself that there was nothing wrong with it, as it was all consensual. After texting back and forth on our private dark web forum for some time, I quickly took out a huge chunk of my wife's and my savings to buy a remote cabin we could use to carry out our plans. I even lied to my wife, telling her that I had a business trip that weekend and I was counting the days until it happened. However, when the weekend came, I got an unfortunate text from Maywest Disciple 783 telling me that he had second thoughts and that he wanted to back out. Words can't explain the rage I felt at that moment, and I became even more infuriated when I tried to convince him, and he stopped answering my texts. I'd stopped going to my psychologist at this point, and I'd thrown away all the antipsychotics I'd been taking, so my mind couldn't handle the rejection. I remember letting out a guttural scream, and suddenly everything around me went dark. When I came back to my senses, I watched in horror as my wife Claire was cowering in front of me while holding our 2-year-old son Philip, who now had bleeding wounds all over his body and was screaming at the top of his lungs. I didn't need anyone to tell me the atrocities I'd just committed, as I could see nasty bite marks all over my son's body, and I could still taste the metallic flavor of his blood on my tongue. I couldn't believe I tried to eat and consume my very own son, and I collapsed screaming because I remembered that horrified look on people's faces when I used to dissociate as a kid. No one had looked at me that way since my mother found me eating my flesh when I was 12, but it was the same expression my wife had on her face as she put enough distance between our son and me. I will never be able to express the magnitude of guilt I felt in the hours that followed. My wife Claire, who was still looking at me like I was a monster, had to fight me off and stop me from eating our own son. I knew that was the end of our family, but Claire loved me too much to call the police, and even if she hated me in that moment, she still knew I was the man who loved her for all those years, and she didn't want her son's father to spend the rest of his life in prison. So she decided to check me into a mental institution, saying I was a danger to myself and others. I didn't protest, as I knew I deserved much worse for what I'd done. It's been about 3 years now in this institution. My wife has stopped coming to see me, and I don't even blame her. I don't even know what day it is, but I am currently sitting in my room writing this disturbing table of what was once my life in a journal to pass the time. I often wonder if death would finally satiate the seemingly insatiable morbid hunger of the monster that still lives inside of me. It's taken me some time, but I've come to the realization that it's only when I leave this world that the voice nagging me in my head will stop. And I truly hope that when that day comes, I will finally understand what it means to have some peace and quiet. In the year 2004, a truly morbid true crime case that is mostly unknown to the public occurred in the small town of Fergus Falls, Minnesota. It was an extremely niche case, and most of the details were redacted. But according to a few statements from locals, it was later revealed that an anonymous man was institutionalized at the Fergus Falls Regional Treatment Center after he had attempted to attack his family. Official reports were sparse, as the case was never reported to local authorities. However, a few anonymous neighbors who gave second-hand accounts claimed that the institutionalized man had attempted to cannibalize and eat his own infant son the night before. His wife, whose name was also redacted, chose to give no official statements. Locals believed that she wanted to protect her husband, whose attempted filicide would have landed him at least 20 years in prison on an attempted murder charge, so she denied everything. The widely unknown case was seen as a rumor during the weeks that followed the initial reports, but records show that the disturbing details of the case actually happened, as the anonymous man apparently suffered from a psychotic and dissociative episode, which led his wife to admit him to the Fergus Falls Regional Treatment Center. While it was never confirmed, sources close to the unnamed family said that even though he'd committed an atrocious act that nearly killed their son, she still didn't want the father of her child to spend the rest of his life in prison. It is unclear what happened after the anonymous man was checked into the Fergus Falls Regional Treatment Center. Several records show that the center was closed in 2007, and both his and his family's current whereabouts are unknown. I also found it difficult to trace the exclusive dark web Cannibal Cafe forum that the Anam referenced in 2004. Several records confirm that the original Cannibal Cafe never existed on the dark web, as it was strictly a ClearNet website created in 1994 by an individual using the alias Pero Loco. While I was able to confirm the exact origins of the dark web forum mentioned in this case, it is believed to have been one of the several successor sites that emerged after the original Cannibal Cafe was shut down in 2002. The gruesome case of attempted cannibalism sparked similar discourse to the more famous Armin Mae West case during the months that followed the incident. There were apparently a few people who argued whether an individual should be jailed or placed in an asylum for carrying out a consensual act, even if the act was something as morbid as cannibalism. However, regardless of differing opinions, the law remains crystal clear. Several law enforcement agents who weighed in with their opinions on the case stated that it doesn't matter whether both parties consent to ghoulish acts like cannibalism or murder, because at the end of the day, these acts are illegal, and any individual carrying them out will be punished by the full force of the law.
I met Laura 2 years ago. It ended like most things that start too fast. Broken glass, blocked numbers, and that stupid silence that makes you check your phone every 2 minutes. We didn't talk for months, and when we finally did, it was just to argue. I thought I was done with her until she showed up at my job one day drunk and crying. I ignored her. That was the last time I saw her in person. By then, I'd started seeing someone new, Megan. She wasn't perfect, but she was good for me. Simple, kind, didn't play games. Laura didn't take that well. She started calling again, sending messages from fake numbers. Stuff like, "You'll regret this," and "She's not better than me." I didn't answer. I thought it would stop. It didn't. 3 weeks later, I noticed someone watching my building from across the street. Always at night, hoodie up, phone in hand. I told myself it was nothing, probably someone waiting for a ride. But when I saw him 2 nights in a row standing in the same spot facing my window, it stopped feeling random. I didn't tell Megan at first. I didn't want her to think I was paranoid. But one night she left my apartment around 10 and 15 minutes later, she called me crying. Someone had followed her car for 3 blocks. She couldn't see who it was, just the shape of a man in the driver's seat behind her. When she turned suddenly into a gas station, the car kept going. That night, I went to check the street camera in front of my building. The guy was there again, same hoodie, same stance. He never moved, like he was waiting for something to happen. I reported it to the police. They didn't care. No direct threat, no action. Megan begged me to install cameras inside my apartment. I bought a couple the next morning and set them up in the living room and hallway. Things calmed down for about a week. Then Megan stopped answering my texts. I found out what happened 2 days later. Her neighbor told me there were police outside her building early that morning. Megan had been found dead inside her car, parked behind her complex. The cause wasn't public at first, but when the report came out, it said she was stabbed multiple times. No sign of robbery. No defensive wounds either. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't. The idea that she was killed because of me made me sick. I couldn't sleep. I started rewatching the security footage from my apartment, going through every night, every frame. I found something on the night she died. At 2:14 a.m., my hallway camera caught someone trying my front door. He didn't break in, just tested the handle. He leaned close to the door for a few seconds, breathing hard. You could hear it on the mic. Then he turned and walked away. I froze the frame and zoomed in. Same hoodie. After that, I barely left the apartment. I covered the windows, locked the doors twice. Every noise made me jump. Every car outside sounded like him. I wanted to believe Laura wasn't involved, but I couldn't. The timing, the messages, the stalking, it all lined up. One night, I woke up to a noise coming from the kitchen. Something metallic. I sat up and listened. Another sound. A drawer sliding open. I reached for my phone and turned on the camera feed. The screen showed the kitchen empty. Then a shadow crossed the frame, tall, broad, moving fast. The screen froze for a second, glitched, then went black. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept near the bed and crept toward the door. The floor creaked under my feet. The hallway light was off. When I reached the kitchen, the fridge door was open. Food on the floor. The window above the sink was half open. I turned to leave, and that's when he came out of the dark. He grabbed the bat mid-swing and slammed it against the counter. I felt something snap in my wrist. The sound it made didn't seem real. He shoved me back hard, knocking me into the wall. His face was covered by a ski mask. He didn't say a word, just breathing, deep, violent. He stepped closer and pulled out a knife. Long, jagged, dirty. I tried to kick him, but he caught my leg and twisted it. Pain shot up my side and I screamed. He dragged me by the leg into the living room. My body hit the floor hard and I could barely breathe. My right ankle was twisted, my hand crushed under his boot when I tried to push myself up. He didn't say a word. He just watched me from behind that mask, breathing steady like he was in control of every second. He knelt beside me and tore my shirt open with the knife. The metal felt cold against my back. I tried to crawl forward, but he pinned me with his knee. I felt the blade touch my skin and then it moved. Slow, deliberate. The pain was sharp, immediate, like fire spreading under the flesh. At first I thought he was cutting me at random, just enjoying it, but after a few seconds I realized he was forming letters. Each stroke was a word being written in blood. The sound of the knife scratching against bone made me want to pass out. When he finished, he leaned close to my ear and whispered one word. Laura. He stood up and left me there bleeding and shaking. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I could feel the blood soaking into the carpet, the air heavy with the smell of iron. I blacked out before I heard the door close. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Everything was white and humming, the light too bright to handle. My arm and leg were bandaged, my fingers in a cast. A nurse told me I'd been found by a neighbor who heard me screaming through the walls. I was lucky, she said. I didn't feel lucky. They said my back had deep lacerations, but no permanent nerve damage. The doctor told me I shouldn't look at it yet. I waited until I was alone, then pulled the blanket down and grabbed a mirror. The word was carved across my upper back in thick, uneven letters. Laura. The skin around it was swollen, the stitches black and ugly. Seeing it made me nauseous. The bastard had branded me like a message or a claim. I couldn't stop shaking. I knew exactly who had sent him. I told the police everything. The threats, the stalking, the break-in, Megan's murder. They said they'd look into Laura. That night an officer came back. His face said it all before he spoke. They'd found her dead in her apartment. Laura was lying in her living room, throat cut, blood everywhere. No forced entry, no robbery. The neighbors said she'd been asking everyone for money the week before. She told someone else she owed a guy and didn't have enough to pay him. The cops assumed it was a deal gone wrong. I knew better.
Ever since I was a little girl, I'd always been told that I had the prettiest green eyes. My mother used to say my eyes were my best feature, and I genuinely believed they were my greatest gift. However, I later realized how wrong I was. As while I didn't know it at the time, the same pretty green eyes I was blessed with would almost cost me my life, and the morbid tale you're about to hear will explain why. I'd just finished college at the time, and had started working towards a career in modeling. Things weren't going great at first, as it was a lot harder to get proper paid gigs than I'd originally thought. It only started to get easier as time went on, and after a while, I began gaining some traction. That was when I was approached by a supermodel agency, and it was there I met my manager, Joshua Howard. Joshua promised to take my modeling career to new heights if I joined his agency, and knowing what a good manager could do for my career, I agreed. Not long after that, I started getting a lot of offers for modeling jobs, and one of those came from a man named Theodore Ridge. Theodore owned a magazine in Milan, Italy, and he told my manager, Josh, that he'd seen my photos and loved my green eyes. He said he wanted to fly me out to Milan to shoot some pictures for his magazine's upcoming spring issue, claiming my eyes made me perfect for the theme. I'd always wanted to visit Italy, so I immediately accepted the job. As Joshua finalized the details, I went home to say goodbye to my mother and my 2-year-old son, Christopher. Leaving them was always the hardest part. I'd had Christopher when I was 18, and even though juggling motherhood with my modeling career wasn't easy, I loved being a young mother. After saying goodbye, I told my mom to take care of my son and promised I'd be back soon. Then I headed straight to the airport and got on my flight to Italy. When I landed in Milan, I didn't have time for sightseeing. Joshua had sent me the studio's location, so I made my way there directly. However, as I stood in front of the studio's door, something felt wrong.
I couldn't explain it at first, but I knew it wasn't just nerves. It took me a few minutes to figure it out, but what threw me off was the silence. Modeling studios were always loud with people moving equipment, adjusting lights and shouting instructions, but at this studio, there was nothing but complete silence. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself Theodore probably just liked working quietly. I even told myself I was just overthinking things, but as soon as I opened the door, a man in a ski mask grabbed me from behind. It all happened so fast I didn't have time to react. He forced me inside where another man, also in a ski mask, stood waiting, holding an injection. I let out a scream, but the first man clamped a hand over my mouth. I struggled with everything I had, but I felt the needle push into my arm and everything suddenly went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I couldn't see anything. My body felt heavy, my mouth was gagged, and I couldn't move properly. I thought I'd gone blind until I realized I was trapped in a small compartment, something that seemed to be a large body bag. I felt a zipper above my head and used my fingers to loosen it slightly so I could breathe. I could hear the hum of an engine and feel the vibrations all around me. I wasn't just trapped. I was being moved in the trunk of a car. I stayed tied up in that moving vehicle for what felt like hours before the trunk opened and the bag was unzipped. My eyes burned from being in the dark too long, but I eventually managed to take in my surroundings. That's when I first saw the faces of my kidnappers. Two men, both looking like they were in their mid-30s. One had short dark hair and a stubble beard. The other had longer brown hair and thick eyebrows. They looked somewhat similar and both had the same cold, menacing look in their eyes. I begged for my life as they dragged me across a field towards a farmhouse. Once inside, they chained me up in a room and left me there for hours. I was terrified, but I knew I had to stay calm if I wanted to survive. When they came back, I asked why they had taken me. One of the men smiled and said, "Our buyers don't like it when the merchandise is loud, so I'd advise you to keep your mouth shut if you want to stay breathing." That word, merchandise, sent shivers down my spine as the man told me why they'd taken me, saying, "We're Black Death, a criminal organization that operates on the deep web. We've been watching you for months. Numerous clients fell in love with your green eyes, and they all want you." He then showed me a picture of myself unconscious in a velvet bodysuit, with the words, Black Death, printed on a logo placed on my stomach. He showed me photos of other women too, all chained up like me. He then told me what would happen to me, saying, "In a few days, you'll be auctioned off as a sex slave on the dark web. If you're lucky, when your owner's done with you, he might trade you in for another slave, but if you're not, well, I've heard some of our clients enjoy feeding their merchandise to tigers. They like watching the beast rip apart the bodies of their used goods." I was speechless, and nothing could describe the horror I felt. Then he offered me a chance at freedom, telling me that my family or manager could outbid the current offers from the buyers. The highest bid on the dark web was 250,000 euros, and they'd let me go if someone paid 300,000 euros in ransom within 7 days. No one I knew could get that money, but I still gave them my mother's number, Joshua's number, and a few friends. I also desperately hoped that someone would at least realize I'd been kidnapped and call the police. But no one came. Each day that passed felt like I was waiting to die. My captors taunted me constantly. One of them, Boris, told me a client had offered 270,000 euros. Not to buy me, but to buy my eyes, as he wanted them ripped out and kept in a jar. I cried every night, thinking of my mother and my son. I wanted to die rather than face what was coming. But then, hope came from someone I least expected. A guy named Jacob. He was one of the men who kidnapped me, but he was different. He brought me food, he talked to me, and he told me he didn't choose this life, as the dark web organization Black Death had recruited him as a teenager. He even realized how they made over $15 million selling women on the dark web. I didn't trust him at first, but he told me something that gave me hope, as he said buyers preferred women without children, and they didn't know I had a son. I begged him to tell them I was a mother. He promised he would, saying it was the only way they might call off the auction. So I waited, praying. Then, on the day I was supposed to be sold, the auction was canceled, and I was released. But my freedom came with terms. Jacob told me Black Death had prepared a letter I'd receive after my release. It listed instructions to avoid the police, spread their message in the media, and pay them $50,000 in Bitcoin as a release fee. If I failed, they'd find me and kill me. I agreed, as I just wanted to go home. They then blindfolded me and drove me to the British consulate in Milan. Jacob said he'd walk me in and pretend to be a friend I'd called for help. But the second I stepped inside, the authorities recognized me and arrested Jacob. I felt guilty as I thought I owed him my life. But when the investigation unfolded, I found out the harrowing truth, as Jacob wasn't my savior as I'd believed, but the very mastermind of my kidnapping. Detectives discovered emails between Jacob and his brother Boris, showing that Jacob himself had masterminded my kidnapping. He wasn't a reluctant accomplice, he was the leader. Investigators also found hundreds of photos of me on his laptop, along with the staged Black Death ransom letter. In court, Jacob admitted he'd injected me with ketamine, stuffed me into a bag, and taken me to that farmhouse. He said he'd fallen in love with me and thought that if he made me believe he saved me from my kidnapping, we'd start a relationship. Both Jacob and his brother were sentenced to 16 years in prison. This whole ordeal changed my life forever, and I've spent years in therapy trying to recover. I still think about it every day, and I sometimes wonder about the countless other women who aren't as lucky as I was. The authorities confirmed the real Black Death group is still out there somewhere, selling women like merchandise on the dark web to this very day. The story you just heard is based on the true case of Chloe Eiling, a 20-year-old British model kidnapped in Milan in July 2017. Lured by a fake modeling job, she was abducted by Lucas Herba, who claimed to have ties to the dark web trafficking group known as Black Death. Herba demanded a 300,000 euro ransom, threatening to auction her online. But after 6 days, Chloe was freed and walked into the British consulate, where Herba was arrested. After his arrest, Lucas initially claimed he and Chloe staged the kidnapping together, but investigators found no proof. Authorities later uncovered disturbing evidence, including photos of Chloe drugged and prepped for auction on the dark web, alongside a chilling ransom letter from the Black Death organization. Lucas Herba was then sentenced to over 16 years in prison, later reduced to 12. His brother Conrad Herba, who also participated in the kidnapping, received a similar sentence. The real Black Death group's involvement remains unclear, and their operations on the dark web continue to evade authorities.
I'm writing this because sleeping stopped being something natural for me a long time ago, and now it feels more like a failed attempt than a routine. When I close my eyes, time moves forward, but my body stays tense, locked in the same position, as if something might break into the room at any moment. I live alone now, in the same apartment with the same furniture, but everything feels heavier, even when nothing is moving. I don't look for peace here. I only look for distraction. My name is Rick, and at that point in my life, I was a university dropout with too much free time and a habit of wandering into places online where nothing healthy ever grows. Forums led to private boards, and private boards led to services that didn't bother pretending they were harmless. I didn't start exploring those spaces because of her, and that part matters more than I'd like to admit. I had already crossed that line long before everything collapsed. Valentine's Day was getting closer, and that date had weight even if I pretended it didn't. It wasn't because I cared about it, but because Lauren always did, And habits like that don't disappear just because a relationship ends. She had left me 2 months earlier, clean and fast, without yelling or dragging things out. A few weeks later, I found out she was seeing Evan, a guy from her university, one of those people who always looks calm, like nothing ever sticks to him. I didn't want someone hurt, and I didn't want blood on my hands, at least not in a direct way. What I wanted was humiliation, pressure, something that would follow her for a while and make her feel exposed. I wanted her to feel watched and uncomfortable, and that idea didn't scare me when it should have. The fact that it didn't scare me is the part I regret the most now. There's a moment before making a stupid decision where your thoughts slow down and everything feels quieter, and for me that moment stretched over several days. I kept scrolling, opening pages, closing them, and telling myself it was just curiosity while knowing that was a convenient excuse. Every time I went back, the decision felt easier, like my brain was already moving ahead of me. The site itself didn't look dramatic or threatening, which in hindsight was worse than any warning sign. There were no symbols, no violent imagery, just text and a form that promised digital consequences using vague language. It talked about exposure, pressure, and lessons, choosing words that let you imagine your own limits without stating theirs. That should have been enough to make me leave, but it wasn't. Before filling anything out, I sat in my chair staring at the screen while the room stayed completely silent except for my computer fan. My hands weren't shaking and my breathing was steady, which now feels more disturbing than panic ever could. I wasn't rushing and I wasn't angry, and that calm made everything feel acceptable in the moment. The form asked for names, social media accounts, contact information, and then moved on to how far I wanted things to go. One option stood out, a simple drop-down labeled Choose a Punishment window, and without thinking too much about it, I selected Valentine's Day. There was no box asking me to explain or clarify anything further, and when I paid, the process ended as quietly as it started. I closed my laptop and didn't tell anyone what I had done. The days that followed were empty, and that emptiness started to feel heavier than any immediate consequence would have. No messages appeared, no accounts were touched, and Lauren's profiles stayed exactly the same, filled with photos and updates that made it clear she was doing fine. Every day without results tightened something in my chest, not because I missed her, but because I felt ignored. Before checking the site again, I sat in front of my computer longer than necessary, telling myself I only wanted confirmation that it hadn't been a scam. That pause felt worse than the decision itself, because part of me already expected nothing to happen. When I logged back in, the page showed a single line reading, "Status processing," with no details, no timeline, and no way to contact anyone. That's when irritation replaced patience, and the calm I'd had before turned into frustration. I felt stupid for trusting something so vague and for spending money on an idea that now looked childish. Valentine's Day came and went without any sign of activity, and that night I drank alone, more annoyed about being fooled than about anything involving Lauren. By the time I woke up the next day, I had decided it was over and that nothing would come of it. I told myself it was just another bad decision that would fade with time, and for a moment I almost believed it. 3 days later, someone knocked on my door. Before opening the door, I stood completely still, listening to the slow and uneven breathing coming from the other side. That pause stretched longer than it should have, and my hand hovered near the knob as if it didn't belong to me anymore. When I finally opened it, Rachel, Lauren's older sister, was standing there with red eyes and shaking hands. I had only met her twice before, but there was no mistaking her expression as she raised a handgun and pointed it directly at my chest. My thoughts emptied instantly, and I didn't try to talk or reason with her. I stepped back and ran through the apartment, focusing only on putting walls between us. She followed, but the gun never fired. I locked myself inside my bedroom and pressed my back against the door while my breathing became loud and uneven. The handle rattled once, then stopped, and I slid down until I was sitting on the floor. From the other side, her voice broke as she spoke, saying she knew I was responsible without explaining for what. She said she wasn't going to kill me and that she wasn't like me, and then she started crying while staying right there. Neighbors called the police after hearing the noise. and when sirens filled the street, officers took her away without resistance. I didn't leave that room until morning. The next day, my email refreshed automatically while I was sitting at my desk, and a single new message appeared. There was no sender name, only a subject line that read, "Thank you for your trust." And seeing it made my body go cold. Before opening it, I leaned back and stared at the screen, feeling my heartbeat slow instead of speed up. The video loaded immediately, showing grainy night footage of a forest illuminated by night vision. Lauren was tied to a chair, barely moving, with bruises layered across her face and arms. Someone off camera adjusted the angle, making sure her face stayed centered but no voices could be heard. The footage cut abruptly to daylight in the same location, where police lights flashed between trees and officers moved around a body bag. Her face was barely recognizable by then, and the final shot zoomed in on a piece of paper stuffed into her mouth. The message written on it was short and clear. For those who misbehave. The email showed that the video had been forwarded to her entire family, including Rachel. I closed my laptop, leaned over the sink, and threw up, but no tears came. Police questioned me repeatedly over the following weeks, taking my devices, searching my apartment, and combing through my online history. I answered everything they asked, and when the truth ran out, there was nothing left for me to add. The site had covered itself well, routing payments through layers that led nowhere useful. Before every interview, I sat in the waiting room staring at the floor, not afraid of being arrested, but afraid that they would stop trying. I wanted them to find something, even if it meant consequences for me, because the alternative felt worse. They asked about my relationship with Lauren, my habits, and how I spent my time online, and every question felt heavier than the last. Eventually, they let me go, not because they trusted me, but because they couldn't prove anything. The case stalled, other suspects appeared, and the world moved on. I didn't. A year has passed, and Valentine's Day is close again, even though I no longer track dates intentionally. My body remembers them without my permission, tightening in ways I can't control. I don't browse the internet the way I used to, not because I've changed for the better, but because I'm afraid of being noticed. Rachel never contacted me again, but I see her sometimes in public places, and she never looks in my direction. That absence feels heavier than any accusation she could make. I wasn't punished by the law, and I wasn't exposed publicly. Every night, I replay the form, the drop-down, and the date I selected, knowing I didn't need to choose a method for something irreversible to happen. I paid once, and even now, I'm still paying for it.